But there will be new limits on the one secure ballot drop box at each county board of elections this fall. LaRose issued a directive saying only the voter can deposit the absentee ballot they're casting into the drop box. And if it's being delivered by a family member or someone assisting that voter, that person must come into the board office and sign a form confirming that. LaRose says it's to prevent the practice of absentee ballots being collected and delivered all at once, which is usually done to help elderly and disabled voters or those in rural areas. LaRose says in the directive that his office will vigorously investigate and refer for prosecution anyone engaged in ballot harvesting, which Republicans have claimed is open to fraud. This week, I talked with Jen Miller of the League of Women Voters of Ohio about why voting rights advocates are concerned about that.
The biggest problem is that boards of elections are only open during business hours. This is going to be very difficult for a lot of working individuals or folks who just cannot get to the center of the county during business hours. The drop boxes are an efficient and secure way of returning not just absentee ballots, but also absentee ballot requests, voter registration forms, candidate filing forms. They're used for a wide range of things. They're 600 pounds. They're bolted to the ground. They're bomb and fireproof. They have 24/7 surveillance, and they are emptied by members of 2 different political parties. It is an incredibly secure and direct way of getting your elections mail to the boards of elections, and it shouldn't be limited to just the voter themselves.
LaRose says his concern is also about ballot harvesting. He told lawmakers in a letter last week that a person could return any number of ballots to a drop box by just claiming they got permission of the voters to cast those ballots. And he wrote that this loophole in the law may be what the League of Women Voters intended because, quote, your legal strategy seeks to make Ohio's elections less secure and more vulnerable to cheating, especially as it relates to the use of drop boxes. In this letter, he also encourages state lawmakers to ban ballot drop boxes entirely. What is your reaction?
So we have several pieces here. First and foremost, let's remember that absentee ballots have really 2 verification processes. First, the person has to verify their identity to get the ballot, and then they have to verify their identity to return the ballot. And that system is incredibly secure. The idea of ballot harvesting is this idea that someone could randomly get a whole bunch of ballots, fill them out, put them in a drop box, not get caught by the cameras, which is number one. They often get caught by the cameras. But secondly, that they would somehow be able to fake the identity, the signature, and all the personal information of all these voters. That's highly unlikely. So that's one thing. Also, my organization, which is 104 years old, has been working on election integrity and security since the very beginning. So many aspects of secure elections are things that we championed, like the fact that machines are in a room with 1 Republican key and 1 Democrat key, that drop boxes are emptied by members of 2 different political parties, cybersecurity protocols, post-election audits. We care deeply about election integrity and security and always will. So this idea that we somehow would want to make elections less secure is entirely inaccurate. At the end of the day, we had a lawsuit, and this was seeking a very narrow ruling. The idea that in Ohio, before this judge ruled, that a grandchild could not return the absentee ballot of their grandparent. Nieces and nephews could, but grandkids couldn't, and that if a grandkid did, they could face a felony charge. That's what we are looking at, a very narrow ruling about the elderly and those with mobility challenges and disabilities, being able to choose the helper that they need. Too many Ohioans don't have someone on that limited list, and it could mean the difference between voting and not.
And that was the lawsuit that you won. And part of that law was then, this is the big 458, the big law that required photo ID, limited counties to 1 ballot drop box, all of these things. That part of that law is not allowed to be enforced. The judge put a hold on that. LaRose says that's part of why he's put this directive out there now. But he's also saying he wants to ban ballot drop boxes entirely, which is a switch from, in previous years, he said ballot drop boxes were fine as long as the legislature was okay with them. What about banning ballot drop boxes?
Again, many conservative states have a lot more drop boxes per county than we do, and drop boxes are incredibly secure. Let's keep in mind that the election process, if you're using the mail, you might run out of time, or maybe you don't have a stamp, or maybe you just really feel better getting it directly to the Board of Elections. The fact that these are open 24/7 with surveillance the entire time, they are incredibly secure and direct way of submitting your elections mail to the boards of elections. They're common sense.
And lawmakers who want to change some of the voting laws that are out there, because there is a big bill that's still in the legislature that would make some other changes, they say that these changes are necessary to keep Ohio's voting system at the gold standard that it is, that it protects election integrity, and nobody's perfect. We should constantly be striving for more security and integrity. You've raised concerns about a lot of the voting laws that have come forward. Why not pass some of these changes? Doesn't that just help with election security?
So we have incredibly secure elections. And in fact, both the AG and the Secretary of State continue to say that we have the most secure elections in the country. And I agree. We have safeguards around every aspect of our elections. We have the strictest voter ID in the country. We have very secure absentee voting. Our machines are not hooked to the internet. Our boards of elections are bipartisan and run by community servants. And so when we look at changing elections, we need to look at all of the consequences. This idea that we would get rid of drop boxes, this idea of folks having to go in and fill out a form, first and foremost, this is going to cost a lot more money and a lot more staff time for our boards of elections that are already overworked. It's going to be harder on voters, and it's not actually going to increase security at all. Any legislative proposal needs to do the due diligence of truly ensuring that it's meeting the goal. And a lot of the proposals I've seen would not change the security of elections, but they would make them more expensive and more challenging for boards of elections and voters alike.
That bill that I referenced, House Bill 374, would allow the use of hand counting of ballots if rather than by machines. If the Board of Elections made that decision, county commissioners or voters made that decision, it would require nearly all voters to have a driver's license or state ID when registering to vote or voting by mail, and would ban boards of elections from scanning early ballots before the polls close on Election Day. Has the league seen this bill, and what are your thoughts on it?
So again, one of the challenges with elections is that they're incredibly complex. The way I like to say it is it's like a wedding, but all the different details of a wedding, but it's a wedding in every neighborhood in Ohio on the same day. We can't make these wholesale massive changes to elections without first thinking about the unintended consequences. And that bill has all kinds of unintended consequences in terms of cost and challenges to the system without making it more secure. So one example would be this hand counting concept. That's incredibly expensive. Keep in mind that the way it works today is that there's a paper backup for every vote counted on a machine. And so a voter can actually check their paper backup before they even leave. And if elections are close and we need to do a recount, we have those paper backups. That's a very good way right now that's more efficient for elections officials, but has the backup if we need it. The great thing about our system that's unlike other states is that boards of elections can start processing, basically verifying the identity of absentee ballots, verifying the validity, I should say, of absentee ballots, and then not counting, right? They just get everything processed. And then it takes one Republican, one Democrat to make those calculations happen. But at the beginning of the night, when we start to see those results come in, that's from those absentee ballots. If they had to wait to open them, verify the identity of the voters, all those kinds of things, it would be days and days and days till we would have an idea of accurate vote counts. And so what it does is it creates more work for boards of elections, makes it harder for reporters and voters and everyone else to know what the results are, but it's not going to make anything more secure.
We hear often that it's the goal is to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. Is it easy to vote and hard to cheat in Ohio?
It really depends on who you are. It's certainly hard to cheat. And I'm very proud of the work actually that the Secretary of State has done, that the League has advocated for, that boards of elections work on, to make sure that there are safeguards throughout the process. Cheaters are caught. It is very rare for someone to cheat. In fact, something like voter impersonation is unheard of. This idea that someone pretends to be someone else and votes. Usually it's things like someone forgets that they voted absentee and then they go on election day. Things like that sometimes occur with elderly, but it's very hard to cheat. It is also sometimes hard to vote. So especially now that we have the strictest voter ID in the country, that particularly harms people with disabilities who may not drive, the elderly who may not drive anymore, students who may not want cars. And so these barriers does mean that some Ohio voters have a harder time getting to the ballot box. And at the end of the day, that's our job. Our job is to make sure that everyone can have their voice heard, but at the same time that our elections are secure. And that's a balance that the Secretary of State, boards of elections, advocates like myself, and the legislature needs to strive to, and we need to be mindful before we make changes.